meeting at the St. Andrews IHOP. We all remember that story, but we had to move after the group, as they say, got too loud. That's what they're saying, huh? And so we wound up at Shoney's on Garner's Ferry, and the group grew from there. So I guess, Jim, you're sort of the keeper of the names. Of the names, yes.
I know where all the bodies are buried.
This is Jim Gandy, by the way, from South Carolina's weatherman. He's been on both Channel 10 and Channel 19 for quite some time.
Yeah.
We don't want to call him the old man of radio.
Hey, I am old.
Well, speaking old man of radio, identify yourself, old man of radio.
Ralph Charles.
There we go.
And I qualify.
We all qualify. Trust me, that's why we're all slobs. And, of course, the fellow who did the introduction for our show, Shakin' Dave Aiken.
And good hello. Whenever you're listening to us, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and good night.
I'm not going to ask you to do the Williams-Rice thing.
Oh, please. We could do that later on. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would
in case you didn't know, Dave is the field announcer for the Williams-Rice Stadium and the Carolina Colonial Life
Arena and Founders Park.
So you do football, basketball men's, basketball women's, and baseball.
Correct.
Okay. So I did kind of want to go through a list of folks we've lost to kind of start our conversation off here. We've had some well-known members of our group here. Bob Fulton, for example, was one of the very early ones. Dave Rogers, who was on several TV stations and radio stations around town. Bill Benson, same for him. We all worked with him at one time or another, it seems like. Jim C., who also made that transition from WIS to WSEQ. How about Homer Fesperman? Homer Fesperman was a longtime recording engineer. One interesting thing about Homer is he was a recording engineer for the shortest #1 song in the history of rock and roll, which was, Dave?
Stay by Maurice Williams and the Zodiacs.
And where was it recorded, Dave?
It was recorded in the Quonset Hut located on Shakespeare Road. The Quonset Hut's no longer there. It's now a concrete building, but that's where WOLO TV's transmitting area and tower is located, or one of the old towers on Shakespeare Road. And it was recorded in 1960 in a Quonset Hut studio. It was not a TV station at the time. It was strictly a recording studio.
Yeah.
And Maurice Williams tells a story. He visited our group
several times.
He tells a story that they did it a couple of times because they liked that studio because it was dead. The studio was dead.
Yeah. The odd shape.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But you can't see me, but I'm doing my hands like
He's
this.
doing it. Yeah, that's right. You can't take the guy out of television, can you? Yeah. So, that's interesting that studio actually was the first TV studio in Columbia when it was WCOS TV, Channel 25.
WCOS Channel 25 was founded in 1953 and went on the air in May of 1953 as South Carolina's first television station. That was Channel 25. It went off the air, lasted 3 years, and it went off the air, then came back on the air also as Channel 25 in 1961 as WCCA. Right, and then the current ownership. Did you work there?
In 61.
Ralph worked at WCCA. You didn't work at WCOS.
No.
I don't think anybody's alive that still worked at WCOS.
I was still in high school then.
Yeah, I was. Well, I was young. And then our current ownership, Bayhackle Communications out of Charlotte, purchased WCCA, and in May of 1964, that's when they bought the station. So they've owned the station for over 60 years now as WOLO TV.
There you go.
Channel 25. So
longest running TV station under single ownership.
I think you're correct. I think you're correct.
So what is the longest running radio station in Columbia under single ownership?
Oh, wait a minute.
This was trivia night.
Okay,
it's trivia.
That's an interesting question. Go down around under single ownership, the longest running radio station under single ownership.
I'll give you a hint. Ralph and I have both worked there.
Well, it's not WVOC because it's.
They've changed several times.
Yeah, they've changed hands.
WUSC.
Of course.
The university station.
I was thinking of commercials.
Yeah.
But you're
Since
right.
1946.
And you know who started that, don't you?
Oh, yeah, Mackie Quave.
Bingo.
Yeah. Another great, but he wasn't a member of the Slobs.
No.
He passed away before the Slobs came to be. Yeah. So, speaking of
Some others there that you want to mention? Because if not, I've got some.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Well, not everybody that attends the Slobs was on television. Jay Lathan
Worked over in the School of Journalism. Hugh Munn was also over there. He would come to the meetings as well. And there were other people. Bob Ford. You may remember him.
That's the name I was trying to remember.
Okay, Bob Ford. Geez, there have been, I think there may have been a couple. Oh, yes, there was. Gosh, I cannot remember his name.
While you're trying to come back up with Dave McDougall was also a member of.
He was, yes.
He was at
that's right.
several radio stations, including program director of WCOS AM back in the 70s.
Gene Upright.
Gene Upright.
Dean Carmine.
Dean Carmine.
Carmine.
That's another
Yes.
name that I've got on my little list here.
Dean Carmine.
Oh, is that right?
He worked in this building here, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's and Dean was on quite a few radio stations. He was Sunday 100 and Q in WSEQ.
He was more of an engineer when I knew Dean.
Yes.
And, of course, Bob Hickman.
Bob Hickman also,
Yeah.
yes, exactly
Bob
right.
Hickman.
Yep. Charlotte Satilli.
Yes.
Yeah,
was
we all
another
remember
one, yeah.
Charlotte. She worked at WIS Television and also at SEE TV. And then Reggie Hall. We can't forget Reggie.
Yeah, Reggie Hall.
thank
Yeah,
you.
God.
Yeah, he was
We worked with
long-standing.
Reggie.
Yeah.
Did you work with Reggie? Jim?
No, but
I worked with
I knew
Reggie
him.
at after we moved. We stole him from WLTX. Actually, actually it was WNOK at the time. We stole him and moved over to WOLO as our anchor and our news director.
Yep.
Back in the 80s.
And of course, we just mentioned Bob Ford, he was an interesting thing about Bob is he was a constable. Actually had a constable's badge, and he did a shtick thing for radio called "Funny Things That Happen to Police," like and little 5-minute stints that sometimes aired on several radio stations around. And of course, we can't forget Jim Paul.
Yeah.
Jim was with WNOK in the 1950s and early 1960s. So
And he was a sportscaster.
but he also did a record show too.
And he did wrestling on WNOK.
Oh, yeah.
TV,
Yeah.
in the old studio on Main Street, that small studio, TV studio. He
Yeah.
was a wrestling host with where they brought the wrestlers in. Henry Marcus brought the wrestlers in.
Oh, yeah.
So that's quite a list you have there. But I keep the mailing list, and it's up to 49 names now
Wow.
On the list?
on the list.
I would suggest that those of you who are listening and interested, and we've missed any names,
To get in,
get in touch with Jim.
or Dodie Yarborough.
Dodie Yarborough
Yeah.
at SCBA.
Yeah.
Actually, Dodie Yarborough at SCBA. And we want to recognize the names. Now, we just talk about people in Columbia right now in the Midlands of South Carolina. But hopefully we'll be able to branch out to bring in legendary broadcasters from around the state.
We do have some scheduled in the future that include a fellow by the name of Rick Amey, who was with me at WSC.
I remember him.
And then he was on WCOS. And then he went into the Navy for 4 years and came back and went into J School here at Carolina and then went into television broadcasting. He has an interesting story about Jackie Kennedy in St. Louis when he was a reporter out there. And maybe we could twist his arm into telling us that story as well. But
Well, before you go on, the name Slobs has gone through many iterations because it didn't start out as that acronym.
So what was it?
It was SOBs.
The Sons of Broadcasting.
Broadcasters.
That worked until we started having women starting it.
Yeah, then that didn't go too well, so we changed it to slightly
Legendary old broadcast.
I call it some legendary, and then I think Bud Tisciani has some other
Sons and Daughters of Broadcasting.
something like that. It's gone through me. The only thing they have in common is they're all slobs.
Yeah.
Right.
True.
Yeah, we have a breakfast here every first Thursday of the month.
Yep.
That Jim sends out an email to us all. So if you are a broadcaster and want to get into our meetings, get in touch with Dodie and she'll get in touch with us as well. That's Dodie Yarborough at the SCBA. We'll have information about that when we put the Slobcast up on the here. By the way, this is not a podcast; it's a Slobcast.
Absolutely.
As we four greatly engender.
And we dressed for it, too.
Yeah.
That's right. So let's see. Yeah, I think so. We're definitely not color matched today. So, Jim, going back in your broadcast experience, do you remember any highlights of something unusual that happened to you back in the day?
Oh my gosh. Oh gosh.
The stories.
Oh,
that you can.
yeah. The question is, can I tell these stories?
Right.
You know.
Statute of limitations has probably expired on them.
Well, first of all, you know, we've all had experiences. You know, we've run into people or something like that.
Yep.
My first experience was when I was on television in Memphis. I'd only been I'd been in television less than a year.
What channel was that?
That was a CBS affiliate in Memphis. It was WREG.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was the first meteorologist to do weather in Memphis.
Here's another connection. The retiring chief engineer of that station used to work at South Carolina Education Television.
Oh, is that right?
It's a small world.
I got to do a promo with Walter Cronkite.
Oh, wow.
Walter was in town to do a speaking engagement at the Holiday Inn Rivermont right there on the river, and we were right next door. We're the CBS affiliate, so he came over. And so they put me, the sportscaster, and the newscaster in a studio with Walter Cronkite. And Cronkite, thank God, he was doing all of the talking. But we did a commercial with Walter Cronkite, and Walter was famous for doing one take only.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was incredible. He would just read a script and do it. And he tells a story on himself, which was great while they were finishing setting up and everything. He says, well, I was in Cairo, Egypt, covering the funeral of Abdel Nasser, who was the of Egypt. And so the world press has gathered for his funeral. And I'm there doing a tease for the CBS Evening News. It took me 52 takes because he couldn't say the premier's name correctly.
Oh, no. Well, you also had an interview with another very famous person, a president.
I did. President Obama. I had the privilege of going up and interviewing him at the White House. This was in
We're all having those
2014.
moments. There we go.
2014 was the year.
10 years ago.
Yeah. I got, and that was just an amazing 24 hours. We flew up on a Monday afternoon. We did some preliminary stuff. We went to the White House early that Tuesday morning, got into all kinds of meetings, got to meet parts of the cabinet, and then we had the interview with the president in the Rose Garden.
And you also were able to do some cut-ins for Channel 19.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, well, I did a live shot from the White House in the noon show.
Yeah.
Now, the CBS crew is taking care of this. And I will say that all of the network crews there at the White House are just super. I mean, they are just super skilled, super people. And they set me up for the interview. Darcy was the anchor that day. And I got to see the shot. I could see the shot before we went on the air. And I said, that's the best shot we've ever had on our TV. I mean, it was crystal clear. It was fantastic. And the president, we had 3 minutes with the president, and it went out beautifully.
Well, of course, we're all thinking about somebody who's not here with us tonight, who's at home, Joe Penner. You and Joe go back a long way. As a matter of fact, you, me, and Joe all share something in common. The city of Jacksonville, Florida.
Of course. I grew up there.
I grew up there.
You grew up there. Of course, Joe was there on radio.
Yeah. WMBR.
Yeah.
And that's where he met his bride, Peggy.
Yes.
And he was announcing a show called the Toby Dowdy Show. And one of the artists on that show is a fellow by the name of Johnny Tillotson, Poetry in Motion, et cetera, et cetera. He and Joe are still in contact with each other.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
No. Joe's in contact with
everybody.
Everybody. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, Ralph.
Yes.
You got your start at the University Station, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
1961. And then
Well, he's a young one in here. wasn't he?
Did anyone card him before he came in?
you never know.
And they rejected him.
Asked me to leave. I don't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
But actually, I was at Channel 25 the summer between my senior year in high school and freshman year in college. But my first radio setup was WUSC in 1961.
And where were the studios at that time?
They were on the second floor, which is now the third floor of Russell House.
Yeah. Yeah, so one station to move down to Hall and change floors. Yeah.
And that was, we were carrier current, so the signal was throughout the entire campus on the electricity.
You remember where the transmitter was?
Yes, it was in the slave quarters behind the president's office.
Yes.
President's home.
When I came there in '63, it had been moved to University Terrace in the corner apartment, which is now where the parking garage is, in the parking building behind.
Right.
Yeah. So
But it was quite a deal. We had one. I guess we're past any legal issues here with the amount of time. But
what happened on the radio stays on the radio?
I don't know, but there's some officers out the door
oh,
here.
they are? Okay, well, but we had a young engineer who was a lot smarter than he thought he was a lot smarter than he was. But anyway, the outside signal was attached to the cold water pipe in the room where the transmitter was. And so for about 2 weeks, you could hear WSC in 5 points without any problem, and under most electric lights in town, the stoplights.
That reminds me of something that happened at WNOK. Somebody went into their tower field, which was down there near Blossom Street, and they stole the copper out of it. And they knew that the transmitter would go wonky. So what they did is they tied one strand of copper, left it, and tied it to the railroad tracks. And all of a sudden, they had a signal in Charlotte. Yeah, I think Hugh Munn was on the air when the call came in over there. Yeah, that's another name we didn't have on the list, Hugh Munn, who was also with us for quite some time.
Yeah, he was there several times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Hugh went on to be what we call FLAC, or the Public Affairs Officer for SLED, for many, many years. He had some interesting stories to talk about there. We're not going to share.
No, some we can't.
Yep. So, Dave,
Yes.
you look like you want to talk. So.
Yes. You have a question for me?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Were you ever involved in any of those Saturday night skits at Channel 25?
Not the ones.
I know Ralph was.
Not the ones that Jerry Pate will talk about or Ralph has talked about. I was involved on Saturday nights with Henry Marcus
The wrestling.
in wrestling.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you that Henry was a promoter for wrestling at the Township Auditorium by years. 50 plus years at least. And he had wrestling on WNOK TV, which is now WLTX. And it was like the Crockett Wrestling out of Charlotte. But Henry also acquired a program out of Florida called Florida Wrestling. And Florida Wrestling, so we got this hour-long show. And these were wrestlers that I'd never heard of before, because...
Oh, but I bet I've seen them.
Yeah. In Florida,
Going up to Jacksonville, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so he says, I want to put it on your television station. So we came up to us to talk to our management, and we put it on Saturday nights at 11 o'clock or 11:15, because we didn't do news at that time. And the deal was there was a 5-minute window that Henry could have in the show to talk about the upcoming matches at the Township Auditorium. Okay? And I was the host of that with Henry Marcus.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Oh, wow is right. And and if you know wrestling, that was in the early 70s. So wrestling wasn't like it is now. The showbiz aspect of it was not as much there in the 1970s. So Henry would come in, and I would say, well, Henry, what you got on the card coming up Tuesday night? And he'd say, well, I got Rip Hawkins, Sweet Hansen coming up. I got Wahoo McDaniel and George Becker's coming in, and people like this are coming in wrestling. And I had to ask him a couple more questions. Well, I tried to say, well, what's the deal with so-and-so and such and such? Like, so-and-so going to win the title. Ric Flair, had Ric Flair coming in. So-and-so going to win the title. And we started doing this thing and ended up doing at least 15 minutes. So we expanded the show from an hour to an hour and 15 minutes because of the talking that we did. And it got to be hilarious with me trying to get Henry to explain to me how this wrestling thing actually worked. And of course, Henry was not going to do this as to how it actually worked. It didn't work that way. But we all knew how it worked. And we had wrestlers come in. And he would bring the wrestlers in, and we would interview the wrestlers. Now, we did that on tape ahead of time because he had the wrestlers come in on Tuesday the week before that were going to be in the next Tuesday night. We had who was it? Rip Hawk and Sweet Hansen came into the studio, and their manager, and they did a stand-up in our studio promoting their match coming up the next week. And that stand-up was when the manager, in wrestling, the manager goes off. Well, he just blows his top and starts yelling and screaming and carrying on. And he's yelling and screaming and carrying on everything. And all of a sudden, he drops a bad word. He drops a bad, and when he drops a bad word, he says, "Can we do that again?"
On live television.
Of course, on live television.
Well, that was on tape. That was on tape. But we were in the control room watching this, and he was all fired up, and he dropped this bad word. It wasn't really a bad word then. It's hell. That's what it was.
But you couldn't say it.
You couldn't say hell then.
Back then, it was
right. And he just stopped immediately and said, "Can we do it again?" So we re-racked it, and he did the whole thing all over again.
Oh, wow.
Without the bad word.
Without the bad word. Exactly right. But that was probably an interesting experience, and I got a lot of play on that. People watched that wrestling show on Saturday nights on WOLO. They really did. And people still ask me about that. You know how people will ask you about things.
So, I was growing up in Memphis before fourth grade, and my first recollection of wrestling was there.
Yeah.
And the first wrestler that I can remember was Sputnik Monroe. Did you ever hear of him?
I know.
Okay, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know if Sputnik ever came around these here parts, but he did where I was growing up, and he was.
You and I being from Jacksonville, I saw something in the news today that's kind of interesting about Jacksonville. Is they're going to cover the Gator Bowl.
Put a dome on it?
They're going to put a dome on it. And the city is for and like $14 to $15 million, and they're going to. To me, the Gator Bowl's a wide open kind of thing. Mm-hmm. My high school at the time did not have their own football field, so we did our home games in the Gator Bowl.
Really?
I was a drum major of a high school band. I got to lead a band in the Gator Bowl.
I have never been in the Gator Bowl.
Neither have I.
Well, you went to Terry Parker, so.
That's right. We had our own stadium.
But there were celebrities. There were
that Saturday night gig.
No,
you did that Saturday night gig at
at
CCA, right?
Shock Theater.
Shock Theater.
Jerry was the director.
Okay.
And Dean Poucher was Dr. Shroud, and Armand Plato was Igor, and I was Chorus the Mummy. I didn't have a whole lot of lines because he didn't speak.
Ralph, was Mackie Quave not involved in those? Was Mackie Quave not involved? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, Jerry has photograph that he has of him interviewing Dick Clark and Bobby Rydell, and I did an interview with both of them for the news, and the only difference is Jerry was smart enough to get a picture of it, and I wasn't.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've all interviewed interesting people over the years. I remember my first interview was a fellow by the name of, what was his name? A singer. I'm having one of those senior moments is what it is.
I'm showing you.
Yeah. There's a picture.
Ralph brought up the picture.
If we were television, we'd be able to show you a picture.
Ralph brought up the picture.
Look at your radio,
Look at your radio
that's
right
it,
now.
or the computer.
Imagine this. It's Dick Clark and Bobby Rydell sitting on a sofa in the studio. You can see Dick Clark has his pants jacked up a little bit. You can see between the socks and a little bit of skin there. Anyway, and they're probably wondering what the heck's going on. There's like a plastic plant probably behind him. You know, the great plastic plants we had in television, and the studio camera there. Jerry, you're not in this picture, but it says ABC TV, WCCA TV, Channel 25. That had to be a caravan of stars that was coming through or something.
Mm-hmm.
I found that in the archives of going through stuff. Going through stuff.
I just remembered the artist I couldn't remember, Johnny Mathis.
Oh,
He was here at the township. So I do want to mention two other people who are not members of the Slobs, but should bear remembering for their contributions to broadcasting in general. One was Bobby Lambert, who was one of the most talented engineers. Bobby I worked with Bobby over at WIS radio back in the day, and he was talking about the day he first heard WIS radio go on the air for the first time. They were at 1010, and they were over at Horseshoe Pond in West Columbia. The other one is somebody we just lost, is Milton Holliday, who was the AM guy for the state. He did a lot of stuff for the state back in the day. So we got a few more minutes. Anybody have any words of wisdom for this august group?
well, I just will say that the meeting each month is filled with stories, some true, some exaggerated, some not true. But I think of all the stories, I think Bob Fulton probably had the best.
Go ahead.
Oh,
We can't do it. We can't do it.
No.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine being in that room with Bob Fulton and Dave Rogers and the voices that you had
Oh, my
at
God.
that particular time.
Oh, geez.
You know, and put Mackie,
it was like a
Quaid
growing-
in that.
Well, and something I didn't know about Dave Rogers is that, you know, he was one of the first announcers over there at Darlington Racetrack. He worked, when they first started, with Howard Cosell.
Yep.
I did not know that, but I did know he worked at the races because he was on Channel 13.
Yeah.
And Bob Fulton at one time did Mutual Game of the Day
Yeah.
with Pee Wee Reese.
Yeah.
So those the voices, I mean, the microphones would just shudder.
Well, and Jay Lathan helped produce Firing Line
Yeah.
for William F. Buckley here.
I'll leave you with
Mackie had the greatest story I know about Mackie Quaid was that he was noted for not being for your not being able to break him up. on
we
the
all
air.
tried.
And everybody tried, but the guy who did break him up was a meteorologist out at the Columbia Airport, and he came on to. He was doing an end of a weathercast, and he always said, "This is John C. Purvis from the Columbia Weather Bureau, returning you to your studio announcer." And Mackie had already cut his mic on and was listening to him, and the quote was, "This is John C. Purvis with winds of 7 miles an hour, returning you to your studio announcer." And Mackie was absolutely on the floor laughing.
No.
But we're going to do a podcast in the future about breaking up on the air. We all have our stories. So we're just thinking about Milton and Bobby. Have we covered it? Well, the Slobs, like I said, we meet the first Thursday of every month. And if you want information about it, you can get in touch with Dodie at the SEBA or Jim if you have contact with him to get on the mailing list so you can attend the Slobs. If you are a former broadcaster, radio or television, we don't care.
And anybody from South Carolina in broadcasting.
And if you think you're legendary.
Oh, good, Ralph. That's very good.
Semi-legendary.
Well, that excludes everybody now.
And,
slightly
and you don't have to be on the air. We have sales managers.
Yes,
we
we
have
have-
management people. We have
We have
Bud Tipstrady,
David Dodd,
right.
Joe Thompson, both of
One
the
of
GMs here.
Joe
One of the things
Mahan comes in.
interesting about Bud is that he actually got a start at WIS television, and then he went and got involved with the project with ETV's founding with Henry Cawthon when
And-
they were getting started there.
And then he created, he ran Cablevision.
Yep.
He put Cablevision on there when it 13 channels or something like that in Columbia back in the day.
Back in the day, he was a big mover and shaker in Cablevision. He's got some great Ted Turner stories to talk about too. Okay.
That he does.
All right, I think we've about bored everybody to death for this particular podcast. We'll be back in a few weeks with another podcast. We're calling them the Slobcast, and they're brought to you from the South Carolina Broadcasters Association.
The beginning of the radio station?
Yes.
Okay, when they first started.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jerry, can you give us a mic check?
Yep. Check. Testing 1, 2. Testing. I was in a National Guard unit in Anderson, and the whole time I'd come back from Fort Stewart, Georgia, summer encampment, and I'd be talking
Ralph.
like them good old boys.
Mic check.
Jerry, you write that way too.
Right.
I know
Mic
that.
check.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. Testing.
Okay, Dave.
Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 3 4. Testing 1 2 3 4. What?
Wait a minute.
What?
Talk to me. Okay, Dave.
What? Dave? 1 2
You
3.
got Dave?
I'm Dave. What do you want to do? Jerry?
Jerry?
Geraldo here.
Which
Jerry.
one do you need?
Say it again, Jerry.
I'm down on the end. Hey,
You probably need to be
A
close.
long sentence, please.
Speak.
do I need to be where you
Right
guys
there,
can
right there.
see me?
That's the same one.
No. Just he
think
just
you
wants a
need to
long
be
sentence to
closer to
set.
the
He's trying to set levels.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Huh?
Want to read something?
No.
Okay.
Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today.
Don't hit the button, by the way.
It's no button. He doesn't have.
My mic is on because the red light's here,
Yeah.
Here,
right?
Dave, you read it.
I've already read that.
All right, are you good with Jerry? David Dare, are you good with Jerry?
You're all good to go. Just roll.
Okay.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, this is Rick on the other end of the table with a long sentence. Okay, Ralph, go ahead and give him a long sentence.
Long sentence. Want to read something?
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing. Testing. Testing.
All right. Dave?
The game 107.5 in Columbia and 100.5 in
Oh,
Florence
me too.
and 100.3
So we're good.
in Myrtle
I'm good
Beach.
too.
That's my promo for you guys.
It's
Oh, yeah. All
Carolina.
right. Are we ready to roll then?
First down.
If we can start in 55 seconds, it would be great.
That's because the red hand will be at the 12.
Yep.
Oh, we had that big Western Union clock, remember WQXL? And they would hit the top of the hour,
Yeah.
and the light would go off. Right? Right, remember that?
It would adjust itself. I don't know what it was, where it was getting the information.
It was getting it from Western Union.
Western Union. It was a Western Union clock.
Yep. We're going to start in 20 seconds. David Dare, are you ready in 15? Not ready? Ready in 15? 10? Go ahead and roll them. Welcome to the second of the podcast that we call Slobcast. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about one of the legends of Columbia Broadcasting, Mackie Quave. And you three guys have all worked with him. So, Dave?
These three guys. I'm Dave Aiken, by the way.
Ralph Jarrells.
Jerry Dean Pate.
Jerry Dean Pate. I'm going to acquiesce to these gentlemen because they worked with Mackie before I did.
Okay.
Jerry and Ralph both worked with Mackie at WQXL
And WCCA television.
and WCCA TV.
I was fresh out of high school, and I got a job at Traw High School, okay, and came to Columbia, and I got a job at WCCA TV. And I met Mackie Quave and Dean Poucher. They were among the first people that I met, and I thought they were just incredible, okay? They were both talented. Mackie was a legend. He'd been on NBC radio. He did dramas on NBC when they were doing that. He was that good. I ran camera on the Cactus Quave show, which was a kiddie show they were doing at Channel 25.
Now the
So,
story.
Ralph,
Yeah, that moved over from
The
Channel
story
10.
about that was it started on Channel 10.
Yes.
Yep.
And for some reason, they were able to I don't know if they got license for everything, but they moved the Cactus Quave, the Barbecue Ranch, from Channel 10 to Channel 25.
Mm-hmm.
And it was certainly more adult when it was at 25 than it was children.
Well, wasn't it later in the day?
Yeah. No.
Same, and it was the kiddie hour, but it was awful. We had Laurel and Hardy movies.
Oh, my goodness.
And Channel 10 had the contract for Little Rascals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ralph. Tell us.
Well,
Double
there are not many of them we can say, but they were the masters of double entendre.
Very much so. But I've heard those stories. I'm just telling you. My first recollection of Mackey and as Cactus Quave and also as J.P. Sidewinder is I took a tour of the studio over at WIS when I was like maybe a freshman in high school or something. And a friend of mine, actually my uncle, was a friend of Jim Yeager. Jim Yeager, who was at WIS at the time. This has been in early 1960 at least.
Yeah.
And he calls up Jim Yeager and says, hey, I've got my nephew, David Aiken, who's really interested in broadcasting. Do you think he can come by the studio and take a tour? So I took a tour one afternoon, and Jim Yeager kind of took me around. And it was during the time when they were doing the Cactus Quave
live TV.
It was live TV. And they did this, and that's why I ran into J.P. Sidewinder, Dean Poucher, and Mecca, because they were carrying on in the hallway with the camera out in the hallway. They had a camera in the hallway, and they're fighting like they're fighting like they did, right?
The 542.
Yeah, not even in the studio.
542 posse.
So that's my first recollection of, and I didn't get to meet them. I didn't say, "Hey, I'm David Aiken," that kind of thing.
Right.
I was just a kid who was in awe of live television.
Man, they were incredible.
Yeah. I remember Dave Mackey when he was over at WQXL when we were in the street side studio where the glass window in the old Columbia Hotel.
Yeah.
And I was working the overnight show at WCOS, the all-night satellite. By the way, my name over there was Johnny Fox.
Hey,
Johnny Fox, yeah, top of the five to cream the crops. But anyhow, sometimes I go over and visit with Mackey, and he'd, of course, let me in, and we'd talk radio and all that kind of stuff. But Mackey, one time he was reading the news, and I've heard about the stories. You couldn't break Mackey up for anything, so I turned the copy upside down. He didn't miss a beat.
No.
So
he could read it upside down
I know.
and from a mirror.
Yeah, and Mackey smoked at the time, and he had a set of matches right there, so I took a match and lit the bottom of the copy, even on fire. Nothing. He didn't speed up or anything, just kept on reading. I finally got to work with Mackey and Dean and Homer Fesperman. We mentioned him in the last podcast on a series called The Investigators, done by the Alcohol and Firearms Bureau of the ATF, which is part of the Internal Revenue Service.
Alcohol,
Tobacco and Firearms.
Tobacco and firearms.
Yeah, and these were put together shows for radio. They were half-hour shows.
Drama.
Radio dramas. And it literally were, we had scripts and everything, and we'd have a cast of about 5 or 6 people. Yeah. And remember, we had to do our own sound effects and that. We had to,
But never.
yeah, we had to do our own Foley work. We had to do the crunching on the gravel and the
Use cornflakes.
yeah, use cornflakes and all that kind of stuff. So. that is old school radio right there.
And it was
Mackey did that because he had a grant from ATF to do that. The government gave them a grant to do that.
Yep.
And when they did that, I don't know how many investigators they did, but when they did that program, it was syndicated, sent free to all the radio stations in South Carolina.
Really?
And most radio stations, we ran it at WQXL, I remember
It was like
that.
5 copies recorded each week,
Yeah.
and then they bicycled from one station
Most
to another.
radio stations ran it as the last half hour of the broadcast day. We were a daytime station, WQXL, so maybe on Sunday at 6 o'clock we were running that. Up at Clinton, where I worked, we ran it like the last half hour of the broadcast day. Or some people put it on Sunday morning or
That's what
or
WCOS
middays or
did. We
something
put it
like
on
that.
Sunday mornings here.
Lou Fisher was the head of ATF for South Carolina.
At that time?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was done like a radio drama. If you remember the radio dramas that were on the radio networks at the time.
It was when radio was black and white.
Right. When radio was back. And my greatest line is, you had to use your imagination.
That's right.
Because that's what radio is all about, folks. It's radio
And it was superior.
is
You
television
think
without
about,
pictures.
well, when radio was in its heyday,
Absolutely.
television started coming along, and they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
TV didn't know what to do, so they're making up stuff. Okay, I mean just games and bad game shows and stuff. Anything to be able to do that. So
Ralph, we were talking before we started recording this, talking about WQXL radio and Mackey and Dean Poucher. And in the building that we're in recording this right now, it's the Cumulus Studios in Columbia. But previously it was the old Columbia Hotel. This location, Sumter and Gervais Street. And we all worked in the old building.
In the old
Yep.
building.
On this floor.
Yes.
In the old building.
On the second floor. On the second floor. In
well,
this,
yeah,
at
where the
first,
parking
first floor. I never worked on the first floor. But
I did, yes.
Parking garage was where it was dirt.
right.
Yeah.
And and we had parking out there. If
Yeah.
you paid an extra fee, you could park under a tin shelter.
But parking was free as
And one of
opposed
the
to like it
big
is now.
things,
Right.
one of the big things at WQXL is, thanks to Mackie and Dave, and Dean, they were the first radio station to have cars with two-way
radios in it.
to talk about traffic.
And we were, excuse me, Ralph, I don't
Go
want
ahead.
when the old post office down on Assembly Street was being constructed, and that it's on a big high embankment, and a wall of dirt collapsed and buried 2 or 3 of the workers in that, and we circled, we unloaded the whole staff. I think Ralph, you were there.
Yeah.
I was there. Dean Poucher and a couple of other guys had these 2-way radios, and we were doing a commentary on what we were seeing.
Because in radio then, most of the time you had to have a phone line.
Yeah.
You had
Yes.
to have a box and a phone line. You couldn't go live on the air, so they had these 2-way radios to do
Yep.
that. I was a teenage agent. I was a tag. Remember that?
You were what?
Tag.
TAUG.
Tag.
Teenage Underground at WQXL.
Tag agent.
That was Hal Von Essen and Dick
Anderson.
Anderson, Dickie Anderson. They were. We did some pretty
They're
good
the
stuff.
Dave. I don't
We
know how to
did
be
some
part of it.
pretty good stuff
But
there.
I'm a tag. I got a card somewhere. I got my card carrying tag.
I was working at QXL, and I was getting $75 a week. Ooh, this is
Big money.
1964. So I got a job reading the news, 15-minute newscast at WOLO TV. This is after CCA went bankrupt and Bayhackle bought WOLO. And I would go out there and read the newscast, and then after I'd finished that, I would get in the booth and I would record all of the station breaks. And
Do the book.
And Friday night was awful. I was at, no, I wasn't at Fort Jackson then, but anyway, I had to record Saturday's book, Sunday's book, and Monday's book. All of the station breaks. Took me forever.
And all of the live commercials.
Yes.
Well, speaking of Mackey, and he is foundational to one of the earlier radio stations in the city, and that is he was instrumental in founding WUSC AM back in the days. It was 7:30 on the dial when I got there in the 60s, but Ralph, wasn't it on another place when you first got there? I'm trying to remember. It was,
I'm trying to remember, and
well, you know what?
I just don't know.
It was a Conrad frequency. That's why they went to 7:30, because it was on a Conrad frequency 640.
Yeah, that was.
Yes.
It was 640.
Yep. But Mackey, he had the gift of, he was a great salesman as well as being a great on-air person. He went out and he convinced South Carolina Electric and Gas to donate copper wiring so they can connect the transmitter that was in the building behind the president's house, the old slave quarters, to
At USC?
At USC, to the power lines That was how they would and of course, WSC covered all of about a 10 square block area.
Yeah.
This area back here behind us, right?
Yeah.
That way
You can hear it here
yeah.
because we're right across from the campus practically. But
Yeah.
Rick, how long have you been involved in WUSC and helping young college kids
I did my
with
first show
broadcasting?
when Sugar Shack was the #1 song.
1963.
Yes, November 8th, 1963 was my first show. And back in those days, WSC has a way of, they're a training station. And
Sure.
they actually did train most of the talent in Columbia in the 60s and early 70s. A lot of names that you hear on the radio, including Weird Beard. A lot of people remember Weird Beard from, he was on a few years ago. He also came through WSC. Linda Nunez, who was Mama Jody Page at the B106, one of the cumulative stations, she was also from WSC. But back in those days, the newbie DJs, we call them baby DJs, out the meaning for a freshman, you're a baby DJ. what their thing was they never did a live show. They always did pre-recorded shows.
Right.
And it was played back off of a big old Ampex reel-to-reel machine that was in a rack behind the master control. And it would set to where it would turn the transmitter off when it ran out. So that show ran from 11 to 1. And it was there because Russell House closed at 11 and everybody had to get out. So the station, that was the first automation I ever worked with.
How many kids have you worked with?
Well, the current staff, announcing staff over there is over 200. So I would say probably 1,000 over the years.
Wow.
Now, I left WSC in '65 and went to WCOS and did the Johnny Fox thing over there, then to WIS Television, then to WIS Radio, then to SCTV. And then I left broadcasting full-time in '92, but still did the firing line show for William F. Buckley until he retired in '99. And then got back into it in 2007. So most of my career, except for that 7-year period, was involved in one way or another with radio. But we just celebrated my 61st anniversary of my first show.
Wow.
There you go.
We'll be celebrating it this November. We did my 60th last November. So
We want to tell war stories now.
yeah, we can tell a war. So you got a war story for us?
We were talking about Mackey regarding the Saturday night show, Shock Theater.
Yeah,
And we mentioned Jerry's name in one of the previous
I was the
podcasts.
director.
absolutely. He was the
And
director.
Jerry was the director, but Mackey was not part of that show.
No. Dean Poucher,
Yeah.
Ralph Gerald. Go ahead. Run the cast.
Yeah,
through.
Dean was Dr. Shroud. And if you recall, this would have been black and white.
Yeah.
And Dean's costume was to put on a black cape and put some spirit gum on a cotton ball and paste the cotton ball to the top of his right eye, I think. Anyway,
He
one of
used
his
Hazel-
eyes.
He
And
used
then he put
Hazel Bishop number 12. I'm
well,
sorry.
he found a makeup called Sudden Beauty.
That was it.
And somehow or other, I couldn't figure out, unless it was just great humor that managed to do that. But
Ralph.
here he is putting Sudden Beauty, and it was so white that the black and white cameras glowed.
Well, he's supposed
And
to be some kind of
he would
character.
put this facial mask on, and then right before we went on the air, he'd scrunch his face so this thing was cracking, and ideally he'd come on the air and a piece of this would be falling off like his skin was falling out.
Now
and the setting was a Happy Vale sanitarium
and
and had been closed or condemned.
It was condemned.
It was condemned.
And that was how this show opened, is Happy Vale Sanatorium, and the sign was cockeyed and condemned across it. Then he would come, he came out of the coffin, didn't he?
I don't remember. Yeah, the standing coffin.
There was a standing coffin,
Yeah.
and that you would begin the show, and you would see these two hands come out around the door of the coffin, and he'd move it over and get out and start the show, and nothing.
This is live TV,
and
live,
nothing,
no tape.
Nothing, absolutely nothing scripted. He would get together and have this wild idea before the show, and he'd sit down and tell everybody what he was going to do. And half of it he would, and half of it would be totally made up on the moment.
You guys were both involved with the Mummy show, weren't you?
Oh yeah, I got
The Mummy episode.
I got two. Well, we had a lady vampire. Okay,
Who are y'all knew?
we had these. Oh yeah,
Her name was Vampira.
and so I'm 19 years old, smoking Marlboros and drinking beer down at the Owls Club at 5 Points, and talking to women that are 40 years old, and I'm 19. Okay,
And you're saying, I'm on television.
well, and I'm a director on television. So anyway, the town theater crowd was trying to desperately get on the program. And there was one lady who was a DJ here in town. She kept bugging. She came out to the station on Friday nights. It was out there. So she kept bugging and bugging and bugging. Finally, Dr. Shroud says, "Okay, we'll do it." Now, I'm the director, and Shroud would give me verbal cues on the air. He said, "Well, it's time to go to the laboratory." And I would tell the cameraman to put a camera. We'd get a wide shot of them, okay?
You only had 2 cameras, didn't you?
2 cameras, right.
And we would do these live performances in the studio and play old Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff movies. And we would come on, and people in town would have shock theater parties. And they would turn the TV down when the movie was running, but when we went live, they turned it back up because those guys were incredible. Anyway, the night the Lady Vampire was to come on, it was raining and lightning, and we were in a Quonset hut, so you could hear the rain bouncing off the top of it. She waited till the very last second, okay, to step on camera. She was wearing red lipstick, had long black hair, fangs, okay, and a white negligee with nothing on underneath it. And when the lights hit her, it became transparent. And the cameraman goes, "God almighty, you can see clear through that thing." And Dr. Shroud is on the air, and he says, "Eyes, focus on the eyes of the vampire." So we shot her from the neck up the whole time.
Kind of like Elvis.
Yeah.
We had a guy come on who was a 6'7" soldier, young guy who was at Fort Jackson, and Dean was going to make him the monster. He was making his own monster, and we had
A mummy.
No, that would have been me.
No, this guy was a mummy.
So he had brown paper taped over most of his face, but he had one eye hole, and nobody bothered to ask him if he happened to be afraid of knives or anything like that, because he was a soldier. So Dean says, "Now I'm going to make the mummy," and he pulls this knife up, and the guy looked at him, and
They got
I don't remember what he said, but he screamed. He jumped up.
We had him wrapped in gauze, and there was a hellacious lightning and thunderstorm out back, okay? And the mummy is lying on a table with his eye hole away from the camera. And we got Joe Soros, who was a director at ETV, came out to be the mad scientist. And he was going to bring the mummy to life. And the whole time, this mummy was in there going, I've never been on TV before. What are y'all going to do? He's giggling like this, and we're telling him, be quiet, in the storm and the lightning and all this stuff. And nobody asked him if he had any issues with hypodermic needles.
It was needle.
And the mad scientist that was how they were going to bring the mummy to life. And somebody had gone to a veterinarian and got a syringe that you'd use to give cow shots and a long needle on the thing, and with some vial that you would hang up in a hospital room. And Joe said, I jammed that needle in it and started to fill it up, and said, I looked down and that guy's eye was just twitching like crazy, man. He goes, well, it's time to bring the mummy to life. And he raises a guy's arm and pretends to give him a shot, at which point this guy on live television sits straight up and says, hell no, I didn't come here for this. And he runs off of the set. And I'm telling the cameraman, stay with him. And he ran completely off the set into the prop room in the back. And we had a garage door that you would roll open. And he rolled that open and ran out into the back in this thunder and lightning storm with the guys with the gauze flapping around.
So how far did the camera follow? Did the camera go out into the storm too?
Oh, yeah, we went out there, and it took 30 minutes to talk him back into the station.
Well, y'all kept a straight face on things like that.
And we had no videotape.
I was saying,
it was
there's
live.
no videotape.
Live.
It was live TV. It's only in our memories, in your memories.
Yeah, that's it. And you were saying we did other things outside of the studio.
Shimmy's had a fishing show.
We had, that's another story. We had, but Igor and I did record shows, monster mashes. In fact, did one for the CYO group here in Columbia. And, but we won't do that one.
I got one more Wolo story, Dave.
Okay.
When I was making $25 a week, reading the news and recording the books for the weekend, I was in there, and we had a director who was also the cameraman. We didn't have any camera operators. So I'm on the set reading the news, and I see the cameraman lock down his camera and walked out of the studio back into the control room. And I'm sitting there reading the news, and all of a sudden, this camera starts trucking to my left. And I got, it's like half of my face is on screen, so I'm squashing my chair around so that I can go on the air. We got a lot more stories. We got a lot
How do you frame yourself up on live TV? There's no cameraman in the
But I did want to point out where what is old has come around again. Because if you walk into Channel 19 studios, there are no cameramen. They have got a bunch of cameras there on lockdown positions, and they just choose which shot they want.
It's a wonderful television experience to have that. Our company has a station in Montgomery, Alabama, that they rebuilt the entire studio down there, and they do newscasts for 3 different TV stations, and they don't have one camera man manning cameras down there. All the cameras are in fixed positions. They have a studio manager, and all the cameras are in fixed positions, and the anchors have their marks, and that's where you sit or you stand. And you go to the marks, and every set has a different camera angle, and the cameras don't move.
Yep. So it kind of shows that things change, and sometimes they remain the same.
Well, it's kind of like radio now, where you don't have to have a disc jockey anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we were all disc jockeys.
Dave, you were at Wolo. You're still at Wolo.
Yeah. Well, I've retired.
I know, but how many years?
Semi. I started in '69, late '69. Left WQXL to go to Wolo in '69.
Right.
And basically, I still have it's kind of like 55 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. 55 years, a career right there.
Almost. I started in radio in 1966, so I'm working on 58 years, right?
What?
So folks, we'll be back talking more like these, telling these war stories And speaking of careers that last a long time, Mike Rass, 50 years plus at WCOS.
They were talking about the WCCA experience. Mike Rast, if his name on WCOS radio, he was part of WCOS TV back in the 50s, in the early, and he hosted a record show, a Saturday night, I think it was Saturday night, called Dr. Jive. Mike Rast was Dr. Jive, and he would spin, I guess, race records.
Blues records.
But that type of thing. On it, and have people out dancing in the studio. Now, that studio was not big, mind you, to do anything.
One quick final story. I got interested in radio thanks to John Risley. And he did a Friday night dance party at the local youth center and would let anybody who was interested in radio actually be his engineer for him. And they would record it and play it back on Saturday morning. And that was the first that I know of rock or popular music show on WIS.
Yep. So, folks, that's kind of like what the Slobs are all about. We sit around and tell these war stories, and we're capturing some of these war stories on the Slobcast. This is edition number 2 of our Slobcast, and we'll be bringing out more throughout the summer as we go along. So stay tuned for the next Slobcast on your favorite, I can't say internet radio station, can I? No, your favorite
Device?
Your favorite device. Yeah.
Device.
Yeah, and we'll be putting out lots of information about where you can do that. Thanks for coming in, everybody.
Thank you.